Welcome everyone to our Study Abroad podcast series. Today we have Nakul, who is from India, and then he went to Sweden, then Denmark, then US. We'll be knowing about his journey to all these countries and whatever happened in between. Welcome Nakul to our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction.
Nakul, when was the very first time during your childhood or during your undergraduate or something when you thought that there is something abroad that you should pursue?
To be very honest with you, I started I thought about doing my undergrad in the US. I gave my SATs back in the time. My like complete transparent, my scores weren't that great, and I wanted to go to a good university. I didn't want to compromise and go to a smaller university. So I did not I did not even apply to bigger colleges, and at that point, I was in this limbo phase where I did not exactly know what I wanted to do, and I was interested in medicine per se, but I hadn't studied much all my life because I was a professional tennis player. So at that point, I decided that I would keep all my options open and see what I can do. And then I decided to do dentistry at that point because I thought there's a scope out there and there's a bunch of things that I can do. But when I joined dentistry, I realized that I didn't want to be a dentist. Um, but I still decided to finish my course and then pursue other opportunities. And at during my time in my undergrad doing dentistry, I realized that I wanted to go into research. So that's when I kind of decided and started looking for opportunities outside of India. I was well acquainted with oral cancer because that was what my some of my undergrad research was on. And I found a lab in Sweden that was doing this, and that's how I kind of reached out to them um, to yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. When you were finding all these labs and Sweden was one option,
Yeah.
did you also look at more options than Sweden, or Sweden was the option at the very beginning itself?
No, so I did look at other other labs, but I was more focused. So I knew for sure what I wanted to do. So I knew that I wanted to work with something related to cancer research. And because I didn't have a broader scope either at that point. So I wanted to keep myself grounded and start looking for labs which who were kind of accepting either master students or people who wanted to do some sort of a research. And I was very open to this. So I had looked at labs in Germany, in Netherlands, in Sweden, of course. I had another lab in Denmark. And at that point, I was in conversation with a few people about doing a research project itself. Not a complete master's, but because I thought that I had enough knowledge for it. But that's how I, you know, narrowed down to Sweden.
So you did reach out to these people through LinkedIn or something. You got in connect with them, and then you decided how you want to
Yeah,
go.
so LinkedIn wasn't that big when I was doing this. So this is 2014. It's been a while since I've left India. So it wasn't that big, and the way that I was reaching out to people was just emailing. So what the way that I was actually doing it is that I was reading research papers, and if I thought a research project was interesting or something came up to me, usually the last author's email address is written in these research papers, and you can just reach out to them and say, "Hey, I am interested in this project. I you and they and often people are looking for students there. So there, even though there is a lot of academics out there, there is always a shortage of students and people to work in these labs. So if they do have an opportunity, they will reach back. And some of them are even nice enough to connect you with other people if they don't have an opportunity at that point.
Sure, sure. So after you connected, and you also mentioned that you are changing your major, right? Because you were doing
Yeah.
dentistry bachelor's and then you
Yes.
moved to other things. So this
Yeah.
change of yours, were they open to that, or you had to face a bit of a struggle because of this change?
Yes, it was a bit of a struggle, very honest with you. And hence, at that point, I decided that rather than just joining a lab, it's probably better for me to do a master's. That way, it'll even like it'll narrow down my focus even more towards something. And that's when I decided to do a master's in a thing. It's called medical nuclei techniques. It's just synonym. It's a synonym for nuclear medicine. Nuclear medicine is slightly different from medical nuclear techniques, mainly because medical nuclear techniques is more focused on research, and nuclear medicine is more, a medical subject. So
Sure,
I did medical nuclei techniques because I was interested in imaging in my research.
sure. And did you had to write any test like GRE, TOEFL, etc. for applying here?
For Sweden, it was just, was it TOEFL or IELTS?
Some
It
English
was
exam.
one of them. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, some English exam that you had to just basically show to get into the masters. But the main criteria for them was prior research. If you've done any sort of biomedical research, that is something that they wanted to look for. They wanted some experience in the lab, so they didn't want people who are completely new to biomedicine, but they wanted someone who could do basic things in the lab and follow people. Yeah, that those are the criterias, and then you had to just write a good essay about why you wanted to do that masters.
Sure, sure. And once you got the admit, you also were offered any scholarship, RATA kind of thing with that,
Um,
or you had to pay the fees?
So yeah, so Uppsala is super nice that way. Yeah, they give you so in general, Sweden offers you to like you can apply to up to 10 programs in different universities that are connected. So for example, it is Uppsala, then KI, which is Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, then the Royal Swedish Institute, which is in Stockholm as well. Then Lund University. So these are all connected universities. So you can apply to you can apply to up to 10 programs in all of these institutes. And if you get accepted in the first five that you have listed, then they give you anywhere between 50% and 100% scholarship. So I was offered at that point, I think it was 75% in my first term. So I had to pay 25% the tuition. And then they are also very open to people who are going there. So once you just join the institute and you get to know your peers and your mentors, they often just recommend you for 100% scholarship in the second term. So from the second term, I didn't have to pay any tuition fees.
Sure, sure. And were you also finding any part-time job and internship while doing masters?
You did have a opportunity to do it, but again, to be fairly honest, it was just very difficult to do anything apart from that. Because your courses were very hectic, you had things to do. You could, for example, work in the university, you could work in the library, you can work at the front desk or things like that. So those were opportunities that you could do, and you did have that. It was just difficult to do it at the same time. I did because I was a tennis player. I did coach over there, and the visa doesn't have any, requirements that hey, you can't do this or you can't do that. So they are pretty open, and I could work as a tennis coach on the side, but that was just a source of exercise as well.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. And the visa process for your application, was that smooth enough, or there were hiccups like that?
Yeah, very, very smooth. I think I've never had a problem with the Swedish or the Danish visa processes. We'll go to Denmark as we speak. But with Sweden, they're just a little slow because they have a bunch of holidays. So it's a tad bit slow, but it's never like any problem. The only um, slightly problematic thing was that we needed to show that you have about 8 months worth of
Money.
rent and food money basically in your bank account, um, which wasn't very easily communicated to us. But once they told us that, hey, you need to show this, we were able to show it.
Okay, okay. So that was like one criteria for the visa to be
Yeah,
processed. You have to show that.
yeah. Just 8 months or 6 months. I think now it's 6 months, but back then it was 8 or 9 months.
Okay, okay, sure. So after you completed your master's from Uppsala University, Sweden, you went to
Yeah,
Denmark also, like for your PhD. So how did
yeah.
you change? What made you do this transition? How did you choose your next university for PhD?
Right. So when I was doing my master's, I did about a 9 month master. So they are very flexible about how long you can finish your master's in. So it can be anywhere between 1 year and 24 months that you can finish it in. So I did about a year and 3 months more or something like that of my master's. So when I was doing my master's thesis, I knew that I wanted to do a PhD, and I was actively applying for funding opportunities as well as open positions. So the way to do a PhD, especially in Europe, is that you can do it in two ways. One is you apply for your own funding, your own money, and then the institute pays you, and you can do your PhD under some guidance, or you can join a PI who already has the money for you, and then you can work as a PhD student under with them or under their lab. So I was doing both. I was actively looking for both these opportunities, and what I applied for was the Marie Curie Fellowship. It's an early stage career research funding opportunity that is provided to a bunch of universities at the same time, and all of these universities are interconnected. So you work in tandem with all of these universities for a specific goal for a project. So I applied to one of these Marie Curie fellowships, and I got in. And the only criteria for a Marie Curie fellowship, to accept a Marie Curie fellowship, is that you cannot do it in the same country as you are currently in. So, for example, I was based in Sweden when I applied for a Marie Curie fellowship, and I couldn't do it in Sweden, but I could do it in any other country who has got that money to do that specific project. So in my case, I had the option of doing it in Finland, Denmark, Netherlands, Germany, and Belgium. So I had these options. I could join any of these labs because I had the funding for the next 3 years at least. And I kind of had to decide on which one. And I chose Denmark mainly because I love the lab over there. And the work that they were doing was very interesting for me.
Sure, sure, sure. So Denmark was the obvious choice, or you were a bit confused between other labs?
No, I was confused between other labs because, I had a very nice dilemma between, some of my friends were in Netherlands or they were in Finland, where I could have pursued it that way. I just chose Denmark mainly because of professional reasons, because I just really liked the lab, the work that they were doing in the lab, and the research project as well.
So I see on your LinkedIn that you have done PhD in neuroscience. So was this
Right.
very similar to your master's topic, or it was again a change in topic?
It was a tad bit of a change, but I used the same techniques that I learned in my master's. So during the master's, I learned something called PET imaging, which is positron emission tomography. It's a form of medical imaging where you inject radioactivity in the blood and then you measure proteins outside the body. So it's an in vivo technique, and I had learned that during my master's, and I kind of just applied it for a neurological disorder. So when I was applying to a Marie Curie fellowship, I knew I wanted to go into neuroscience. Um, I was doing a little bit of cancer research during my master's, but my interest was developing in neuroscience, and that was developed during my master's.
Sure, sure. And once you're doing your PhD and you finished your PhD, you decided to also do postdoc, and then you chose
Yeah,
Yale University. How did you choose
right.
Yale University?
Um, I'd again complete transparency. My wife, who I met in Denmark, decided to do her masters in the US. I was someone who did not want to leave Denmark because it's a great country, and we very much love it. But she wanted to do a master's in the US, so she got into Harvard University to do a master's, and I kind of followed her. So I decided that, hey, I will start looking for labs that are accepting postdocs. I knew that I wanted to do a postdoc, so I knew that I want to stay in academics after my PhD. And I was just actively looking for opportunities. I did apply for a few positions here and there. So one of the labs that I applied to was the NIH, which is in Bethesda in near Washington DC. So that was one of the labs that I was applying to, and then I also applied to Harvard. And at the same time, I applied to Yale, and I just chose Yale because it was the best pet center in the world. So the technique that I work with every day, it's the best pet center in the world, and I originally did not think that I would get that position, but I did get it, so I just chose that for again professional reasons.
Sure, sure. For the audience sake, we have this degree, bachelor's, then master's, then PhD, then a postdoc, right?
Right,
So, from your
right.
point of view, how do you explain this to, let's say, a student? What are these degrees or these stages of life is? How do you
Yeah.
explain them?
So when you're a bachelor, you think you know a lot. When you become a master, you understand that you know nothing. When you finish your PhD, you are very sure that you don't know anything at all. When you're a postdoc, you start to realize that maybe you are good in this very specific thing in your life, and this specific thing that you want to pursue for the rest of your life, trying to understand and get that knowledge. So it's a transition, from getting very broader knowledge about something to making it even more specific as you go with time. So when you did your bachelor's, you will have a broader knowledge of biology, for example, in my case, and medicine. Then when I did my master's, I was more focused on imaging in medicine. For a research purpose. Then, when I did my PhD, I focused it even to the brain, and then using one simple technique which is not simple, but it's one specific technique which is called PET. And I learned that even more in detail. And now in my postdoc, I'm kind of like applying it on a day-to-day basis. So it's
So,
just
what's
a
sure, sure.
vision
So,
focusing.
what's next? What's after the postdoc for you?
So it's a misconception actually that postdoc is a degree. You don't get anything. A postdoc is just a limbo phase between finishing your PhD and getting an assistant professorship. And I am currently in that phase. So when you finish your PhD, you basically start applying for funding of your own, where you can get money to start your own lab and do the research that you want to do, rather than someone else's research that you're helping with. So I'm currently in that phase where I'm applying for my own funding. um, in the US, the way to do that is to apply to the NIH. That's the best way. That's the most prestigious to apply for, and I am currently in the final phases of getting funding. So I hope to get a funding by mid next year is what we think. It is a very long process. So when you apply, you don't know 8 months after that you have the funding or not. So it is a long and tedious process. Um, but yeah, I'm in this phase where I hope to get my own funding and become an assistant professor.
Sure, sure. So you have already decided that you are going to academia, and that's why you are doing postdoc also. And now you are obviously formalizing the process.
Right. Again, I am not very sure that I want to be in academics, but at least I want to be in academics for the next 2 years. That is the timeline that I kind of work with. So what do I want to do for the next 2 to 3 years is how I decide. So in the next 2 to 3 years, do want to be in academics, but 2 years later, there might be a situation where I don't want to be in academics, and I can always go back to the industry to do the same thing that I do as a postdoc.
Sure, sure. So this is almost 10 years of your life. You did like masters, then PhD, and then doing
Right.
postdoc, and then applying for funding, etc. And you did
Yeah.
your bachelor's in dentistry. So there could
Right.
have been an alternate path, probably that you did some become a surgeon or something like a dental surgeon with the same kind of
Right.
timeline. So do you see
Right.
that also as a hindsight sometimes as a like an option or as an option of like I mean some kind of like confusion or something like an alternate career path for a person like you, or how do you see that?
Yeah, I don't see it as an alternate career path anymore because I just never wanted to do that. I do have friends who are still with me in the US, for example, who did dentistry with me, and they came here, became a dentist in the US, did their masters and whatever, and they still some of them are also still doing their masters. So even 10 years later, they're not completely done with their studies. So yes, when I was maybe in my masters, in during my masters in Uppsala, where I would have still kept that in the mind, keep I this is something that I can do. But now that I've done my PhD in my postdoc, I'm fairly sure that I don't want to change my career path anymore. Like I've taken too many jumps from dentistry to imaging to neuroscience and now more neuroscience and psychiatry. So I don't want to take any more jumps, and I want to stick with this.
Sure, sure, sure. So, what advice would you give to younger yourself, like people who are, confused at a bachelor's level? Should they do this? Should they do that? You were maybe lucky enough to figure things out and take a bold step. What advice would you
Yeah.
give to the confused ones?
I think the best advice that I can probably give is just take smaller steps, make smaller goals. Don't aim to I did not aim to be a professor when I was doing my master's. You have to aim to do smaller things at a time, and while doing these smaller checklists, you will understand what you want to do. You are going to be confused for the rest of your life. There is nothing changing that. I am still as confused as I was when I was doing my master's. I'm just more focused. And do something that you like. If you don't like it, don't do it for the sake of your parents, or don't do it for the sake of scope that hey, there is a lot of scope in this field. I That's how I got into dentistry. I was stupid enough because I thought everyone just told me at that point that hey, there is a lot of scope, you'll earn a lot of money. I was like, fine, let's try this, and then I realized that I just don't like it. um that doesn't help, so do something that you really like.
No. So did you also sometimes see that your life was like a maze and every time you chose a path which gave you few options and then you again chose it was like a multiple choice question at each point and then you had to
Always.
choose one
Yeah.
option, one option, one option and ultimately you are where you are right now with all the
Right.
options given.
Right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it is very much like that. Life is very similar to that. You are not going to have one specific route. You can be lucky enough to do that. But in most scenarios, you are going to have to make decisions. And you just have to trust yourself that you will make a good decision.
Sure, sure. Any recommendation on usage of LinkedIn for the youngsters?
Um, I think LinkedIn is such a great tool that if I wish I had in 2015, it would have made my career even more streamlined. I feel like people should reach out to people who are interested. It is just a bulk process that you have to kind of reach out to them. Only a few will reply back who actually have the time, and also who are interested in doing that. I am very interested in mentoring younger generations, and I do that on my free time. I do help people reach out to other mentors who I can, and it is. I would highly recommend to use it, properly. Just make sure that you're not being rude, you're not being, condescending in any way, or just being grateful to the other person that they've taken their time out to even reply to you, and and just and also be considerate of time. Like, they're not going to give you the whole day of the week for that job. They probably will only give you 15 to 20 minutes, and make the most out of it.
Sure, sure. Thank you very much, Nakul. It was very great knowing your experiences and the diversity you had. And it will
Yeah,
obviously help a lot of people make some informed decisions, and maybe some of them will connect with you. So have a good day.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vishal. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.